Hello, and good morning. I'm so delighted to be here. It's always fun to see a good friend being very professional and so eloquent on stage, Pedro. It's lovely. We met on a plane in South America like 5 years ago, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to work together. I am a digital anthropologist. I run a think tank based in Paris, and I teach at Sciences Po. And what I do is I look at the intersection between technology and culture. I look at how the tools that we're using in our day-to-day lives are impacting our social norms and our behaviors and the way that we live our lives. One of the things that I find really interesting in my work is that when we talk about the future, a lot of the times the conversations end up being very tool-specific. We talk about the technologies themselves. We focus on algorithms. We talk about bots. We heard a lot of amazing trends that are coming from Antoinette this morning. And part of those conversations and part of the reason we focus on technology so much is because that the pace of innovation is moving so fast that many of us are just struggling to keep up with the latest feature, the latest iteration of these new tools. But one of the drawbacks of being so focused on the technology is that sometimes we don't stop to think about how these tools are fundamentally affecting our lives, how they're changing our perceptions of the world, how they're changing our very values as a society. And so what I want to do today in thinking about the kind of entrepreneurs that will need to emerge in order to be successful in a changing world is to spend a little bit of time speaking about how this world is changing. Because if we're going to find out how entrepreneurs in the future are going to be able to be successful, we really need to be able to concentrate on understanding what their world would look like from a societal change, and not just from a technology change. So today I'd like to focus on 3 ways that I believe the world is going to change, how our society is going to evolve and adapt to all of these tools. And then I'd like to offer my opinion on how I think entrepreneurs of both today and tomorrow should be responding to some of these changes. So one of the biggest trends and one of the biggest shifts that we are currently seeing in our society is the increase of data abundance. We live in a world right now where data is so easily available. It's cheap, it's easy to interact with, anybody can start using it. And one of the reasons that there is so much data abundance is that we as a society have shifted to where every individual that's sitting here in the audience today, you and I, have become data producers. We, thanks to the devices that we're using, thanks to the connected society that we live in, are constantly producing information that is being introduced into this ecosystem. To give you an idea of how much information is being produced, this is a slide that captures how much data gets produced on the web every 30 seconds. So by the time I finish speaking about the slide, over 102 million emails will have been sent. Over 60 hours worth of footage will be updated or uploaded on YouTube. Now, why is this important? Well, one of the biggest things that we're noticing culturally and behaviorally is that many people are feeling overwhelmed. I want you to just raise your hand if you feel the pressure or if you feel stressed out sometimes at having to keep up with all the emails in your inbox, all the updates of your friends on social media, all the websites that you use, all the newsletters that you're subscribed to, all of the information that you are somehow responsible for being on top of. Raise your hand if you feel like it's too much. This is a very big problem. And to understand why, because overwhelm is actually quite an interesting behavioral issue, we actually have to look in the past. So I know we're looking at emerging technology, but I want to take a couple of seconds and just talk a little bit about how our relationship with the way we have been trained in school, in our society, to engage with information has changed. So when you go to school, and when we're in university and even in elementary school, we've always been taught with a very specific type of information. That information had a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You were in grade 12 chemistry or grade 12 French, or you're learning math. You have a textbook. You have a very limited amount of information. You have a beginning. At the end of the class, at the end of the semester, you're at the end of the course. And congratulations, you have successfully mastered this topic. Think about how people used to consume newspapers. You have a beginning and an end. You read the newspaper. Once you were finished, you were completely educated, or you were reasonably educated about how the world was working. Same goes for watching the evening news. What we have here is we have decades of an education philosophy that has taught us to engage with information in this way. But now the information ecosystem is very different. We have moved from a limited and fixed-end ecosystem, so one where it was very easy to tell where to begin and where to end, to a thriving, infinite ecosystem that's unlimited and open-ended. If you've ever tried to read an article online, you're familiar with this process where you read the article, right? And then you click the link, and then you go to another article, and then a blog post, and then maybe a video, and then a tweet, and then a forum discussion from 5 years ago, and then another article. And essentially, there is no endpoint. But even though rationally we know this, we have been conditioned over decades to always still be seeking that exit point, to seek that end point. Now, this becomes a bit challenging because with the advent of our devices, we're constantly also being distracted with all of this influx of information. And so what happens is we feel this pressure to get to the end, to know everything, to achieve mastery, and instead we just get confused and distracted. And this is dangerous because most people's response to overwhelm is to throw their hands up and say, you know what? I'm just going to stick with what's comfortable. I'm just going to stick with what I know. And this is a very important behavior to understand, that our psychological stress, our race to inbox zero, our race to try to read everything and keep on top of everything, is a behavior that has been taught to us for many, many years. So what we need to do instead, and culturally we need to start teaching this in schools and training in organizations, is we need to develop a state of what I call informational zen. I'm going to give you guys a little secret, which is it's never going to be possible to learn everything and to read everything, and that's okay. But we have a productivity work culture that emphasizes, getting to the end, crossing things off the list. So one of the ways that we're going to have to adapt is we need to update the way that we engage with information in a way that where we understand that we are in a limitless information ecosystem. So there's no point in trying to rush and get everything because you never will. One of the questions that I find very important that I teach to my students is, am I consciously building a state of continuous learning in my decision-making abilities? And I say consciously because we consume information right now randomly. We read all the emails, we engage with on social networks, we go online, we read endless articles, and very few people actually spend the time strategically to push their information diet, to cultivate with intention what they're reading as a direct tool to help them improve how they run business and to help them understand how the world is changing. So a question that you should be asking yourself today, as well as the leaders of tomorrow, is, are you consciously engaging with information in a deliberate way, or are you just running around like a crazy person trying to stay on top of everything without really thinking about the purpose that the information is serving? The second factor is more of a philosophical one, and it's this idea that as we're building these tools, we're infusing the tools that we're building with values, and those values are going right into the code. So one of the trends this morning was self-driving cars and self-driving trucks. And many people believe, as do I, that these autonomous networks are going to make the roads safer, and that's true. But I want to give you an example of a scenario. So we're all in self-driving cars, okay? And you're in your self-driving car, and there's a self-driving school bus that's filled with little kids. Something happens up the road, and the computer has to make a split-second decision about sacrificing one of the two vehicles. So the computer, based on what we have taught it so far and based on how we consider some of the ethics that are happening, would choose to sacrifice the car with an individual compared to the bus full of school children in order to minimize the casualties, right? This is how the network is being programmed now. Okay, so that one was a pretty straightforward one. Here's another scenario now. You have the bus full of school kids, and the computer has to choose between 3 cars. One car has a Nobel Peace Prize winner. One car has a young mother. One car has a 75-year-old man. Which is the computer going to sacrifice? The answer, and there's no right or wrong answer here, but the answer depends on how we as a society value things like motherhood, like scientific contributions, like the value of the elderly in our society. And there's this new field that is emerging called algorithm ethics that is looking to make sure that we are very aware that the tools that we're building contain our code and contain our value system as well. And this is something that we need to start thinking about, because as computers and the technology around us get more sophisticated, there is going to be ethical issues. We heard this morning that self-driving trucks are going to be a big trend. What if the computer has to choose between a vehicle and a truck that is carrying very, very expensive equipment? How are private and capital interests going to play in calculating a value of a life versus a value of millions of dollars of equipment? These are the type of things that we need to start looking at. And this is happening also in our social networks now. This is a tweet by technology journalist Nick Bilton, who reported based on a conversation with a Facebook employee that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't believe in privacy. I'm not here to tell you if that's a good opinion or a bad opinion. I'm just here to tell you that Mark Zuckerberg has a very specific idea of the role of technology in people's lives. He has a very specific idea about what privacy should look like, in his opinion. And that idea is driving the evolution of his algorithms, of his products, of his platform that impacts 2 billion people. Facebook has 2 billion users. So again, I think it's very important for us to recognize that these tools that we're using have belief systems. So modern technology has become the manifestation of the things that we believe and the way that we view the world. So it's important to ask ourselves and to really stop and say, what values and beliefs do my work contain? What worldview, what assumptions am I making about what I think is right, about what I think is important, about what I think is good or what I think is bad? And how are those assumptions feeding into the technologies that I'm building? And to be very aware of that. Finally, I think it's one of the most interesting trends is the shift in power dynamics, where it's never been easier to be an entrepreneur. It's never been easier to start a business. It's never been easier to launch a solution. And for the first time, we have people who are empowered to be able to create solutions for problems without having to wait for institutions. Innovation is moving so fast that many institutions like governments and some universities are struggling to keep up. So we're looking at individuals to step up and provide some real alternative methods and business models to tackle some of these very important issues that we're dealing with today. There's a multitude of ways that you can do this. This is a website called Zadie. It's an e-commerce platform that focuses on slow fashion. All the products that are available on Zadie are made in the USA ethically and sustainably. This is a prototype for something called the Sea Bin Project that was started by a group of surfers. They were tired of going to marinas and going to ports and seeing litter and garbage in the water. They created a prototype that goes through the water, and as it moves through the water, it picks up all of the garbage. They were able to raise funds based on community fundraising. They were able to get investors, and now they're launching their product globally. Again, things like pollution, things like responsible consumption are all opportunities where entrepreneurs can have an enormous impact. And if you think, okay, well, what if my business isn't in a social topic? What if I'm not necessarily focused on social impact? There's still ways for you to make an important change. This is Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. Earlier this year, he announced that Salesforce was spending $3 million in order to close the pay gap in Salesforce to make sure that men and women across the company are getting paid equally. We need more entrepreneurs to stand up for these types of values, and we need more business leaders to start thinking about how they can commit to some of these positive changes through real tangible actions. So the last question that you should ask yourself is, am I generating a multiplicity of good? And I say multiplicity because I hold entrepreneurs to a high standard. It's not just enough to have a good product. You need to treat your people well. You need to make sure the environment is a consideration. You need to make sure that you're engaged in local and global issues. But there's never been a better time to do all of those things. The truth is that entrepreneurs who will succeed will be the ones who are very committed to asking questions. The answers are changing so fast that if you just are constantly running after a specific set of answers, you'll never really get there. So if you ask yourself the following questions, am I consciously embracing continuous learning? Am I pushing myself to engage with new ideas outside of my normal sphere? What beliefs are embedded within my work? How is my worldview influencing the technology that I'm using? And am I expanding my sphere of impact enough? This is the type of reflection that is going to make a real change and that is going to help entrepreneurs be adaptive. Ultimately, to sum up, I believe that tomorrow's entrepreneurs will have to get very comfortable with being constantly uncomfortable. I'm going to leave you with a quote of one of my favorite writers, a man named Rahaf Harfoush, and he says that in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Thank you very much.